Most people watching Perfect Crown right now probably think this is IU and Byeon Woo-seok's first proper pairing. But it isn't. And the fact that most people don't even realize that is exactly what makes this casting more interesting than it looks on the surface. If you go back to 2016, to Moon Lovers, Scarlet Heart Ryeo, Byeon Woo-seok appeared in a small role as the modern-day boyfriend whose betrayal pushed IU's character into the lake, which ultimately triggered the entire story. At the time, it felt like a forgettable moment. But now, looking at it again, that scene almost feels like an accidental starting point for something that took 10 years to come back. Because in 2026, Perfect Crown, which premiered on April 10th and is currently airing on MBC and Disney+, brings them back together, not as passing characters, but as leads. And what makes this interesting is not just the reunion itself, but the way it changes how the audience experiences their chemistry. Because this is not just casting. This is what you could call emotional callback casting, where the audience unknowingly carries memory from a completely different story, and that memory starts influencing how a new relationship feels on screen. At the center of Perfect Crown is Song Hee-ju, played by IU, a chaebol heiress who has everything in terms of wealth, intelligence, and presence, but is still defined by the stigma of being born out of wedlock, which places her in a position where she has power, but not acceptance. Opposite her is Grand Prince Eon, played by Byeon Woo-seok, a character who has status, but very little control, existing in a system where even his presence can be seen as a threat. Their relationship begins as a contract marriage, but what makes it more compelling is the fact that both characters are trying to solve something deeper, where she is seeking legitimacy that was always denied to her, while he is trying to find agency in a life that has always been controlled. But the real shift happens when you step outside the story, because what the audience is actually watching is not just Hee-ju and Eon. They are watching IU and Byeon Woo-seok, with 10 years of history behind them. And that changes everything. Because the emotional weight does not come only from the script, it comes from the audience remembering, even subconsciously, where they last saw them together. IU brings a kind of controlled confidence to Hee-ju, where her character feels composed, strategic, and emotionally aware, while Byeon Woo-seok plays Eon with a restrained energy that relies on stillness and subtle expression, which creates a contrast that feels deliberate rather than accidental. Even during the press conference, IU mentioned how ironic it felt that his character once caused her downfall in Moon Lovers, and now returns as a central figure in her story again, but in a completely different role. And that irony is exactly what makes this pairing work. Because this is not just a reunion, it's almost a narrative reversal. A character who once triggered her fall is now positioned as someone who could potentially support her rise. And that kind of shift is something audiences respond to instinctively, even if they cannot immediately explain why. This also reflects a larger change in how K-drama audiences watch content today. Because people are no longer watching dramas in isolation. They are tracking actors, they are remembering roles, and they are connecting timelines across different stories. Which means casting is no longer just about who fits the role. It's about what the audience already associates with that actor. And Perfect Crown uses that very effectively. Because beyond the contract marriage, the monarchy setting, and the power dynamics, what it is really offering is something else. A sense that time matters, that growth matters, and that even a small, almost forgotten moment from 10 years ago can come back and feel important in a completely different way. As the drama moves into its next episodes this weekend, what becomes interesting is not just where the story goes, but how this dynamic continues to evolve, especially when the audience is already bringing their own memory into the experience. Because in the end, this is not just a story about two characters coming together. It's a story about how audiences connect the past and present, and how that connection can quietly change the way a relationship is perceived on screen. So the real question is not just whether this pairing works, It's whether the reason it works is something the script created, or something the audience brought with them.